Hi friends, welcome to Knowledge Share. Today in this video, we are going to see how we can use PnPCore SDK in Azure Durable Function. In my last video, I have explained you with a detailed step-by-step procedure on how to use PnPCore SDK in Azure Function and how you can register the application to set up the PnPCore SDK and how you can deploy and then change the function settings. So now in this video we will see how we can leverage on the durable function. If you want to set up from the start, you can watch my previous video. So let's dive into the durable function. So what is durable function? Durable function is an extension of Azure Function. So stateful functions, you can have a stateful functions in a serverless compute environment. So durable function primary goal is to simplify the complex requirements. If you have a very complex business logic which you have to implement in Azure Function, the best way is to use durable function, which splits the functions into several sub-functions, and then you can use orchestrations to workflow to architect your actual business workflow. And following are some of the application pattern that benefits from the durable function. First is function chaining, fan out, fan in, async HTTP APIs, monitoring, human interactions, and aggregator. So in this video, we are going to see two application pattern. One is function chaining, another one is fan out and fan in. Now let us see what is function chaining. In this pattern, a sequence of function executes in a specific order. For example, if you have multiple functions, say method 1, method 2, method 3. So if you want to execute in a sequential order, method 1, it has to be executed first, and method 2 and method 3. So it can be done using the function chaining application pattern. And also you can leverage on the values from the previous function and then you can use it on the future functions. So this is the function chaining. So it will execute in the order how we are specifying in the orchestration. Next is fan out, fan in. We can execute multiple functions in parallel and then wait for all the functions to finish. So that is fan out and fan in. So fan out is something triggering multiple functions. So consider the same example, 3 methods. You have to execute all the 3 methods in parallel. So you don't have to wait for method 1 to finish or method 2 to finish in order to execute method 3. So you can execute method 1, method 2, method 3 at the same time and wait for all the methods to complete, and then you can use the response, and then if you want to trigger one more method or if you want to complete the function, you can complete it. So this is the fan out and fan in. We are going to see how these two application patterns in this video. So I have prepared a demo for each of this pattern using PnPCore SDK. And also one thing I would like to highlight is orchestration. So why we are using orchestration? So orchestration is something where you can orchestrate your business workflow. So how you are going to execute the functions and what is the application pattern you are going to use it. Because the function chaining, fan out and fan in, you can also execute these type of functions using the normal mode, but you have to write a huge number of codes, and also you have to maintain the state and you have to maintain where it is still executing, which method is still executing, and there are so many things which you need to take care of. So all those boilerplate codes are already written for you, and it has been covered under orchestration. So this orchestration will manage all your boilerplate codes, will manage the execution of different functions. So it will start the execution, it will trigger the activity functions, and again it will go to the sleep mode. And once the functions are executed, if it wants to trigger the next function, then again it will resume and then trigger it. Then it will go to the sleep mode, then again it will resume, and then it will complete it. So it is not like that it will be all the way it will be monitoring. It's not like that. So it will trigger it, it will go to the sleep mode, and then again it resumes when it really required the orchestrator. So enough of theory. Let us see how we can code it, shall we? Now let us create a project in Visual Studio. So here I am using Visual Studio 2019 version, and the latest updates has been installed, and I have also installed Azure Function template. So here, once you click on the create new project, you can search for Azure Function. I'm going to use the language C#. So click on Azure Function, click next, and let me choose the folder where I need to save the Azure Function. So here let me give a name PnPCore SharePoint Azure Durable Function. You can specify any other name if you would like. So just click create. So the moment when you click create, so it will provide you with a list of Azure Function application. So you can choose whether the HTTP trigger or orchestration function. So here we need to choose durable function orchestration. Okay, so choose this application and click create. So it will start creating the project. So I will just forward the video and will resume once the project is created. So now you can see the project is created. So there is only one function1.cs file where it has the orchestration function, HTTP starter function, and also an activity function. So if you see in the HTTP starter function, they are calling the orchestration. So in the orchestration, they are calling the activity function. Okay, so this is very sample one. Now we will try to implement the PnPCore SDK integration, and also we will try two different patterns, which is function chaining and fan out and fan in. So first let me create some local settings where we need to specify the client ID, tenant ID, and the certificate. So I will just show you how we can create it, but for the detailed explanation on the Azure app registration and how to register the app and what are all the prerequisites that are required for the authentication, you can watch my previous video. So it has a very detailed explanation on how to create an app and other things. Okay, so let me pause the video and then I will come back once I have set up the prerequisites. I have created a startup.cs file where I have configured the PnPCore and what authentication to be used. So here I am using certificate authentication, and I have also configured all my keys, what is the site URL, tenant ID, client ID, certificate, thumbprint, everything in the local.settings.json. And these are all the values that are configured: site URL, tenant ID, client ID, certificate, thumbprint. Okay, so now we have set up the PnPCore SDK. So now we can focus on our business logic. Okay, so let's leave this file for now. So let's create a new file called https functions. HTTP functions. So let us make this class as static. So here we will have two HTTP function. One is for function chaining pattern, another one is for fan out fan in pattern. Okay, so let us come to the functions later. So the next one is, the next class file which we are going to create is orchestrator functions. So here we are going to have an orchestration. We are going to set up the orchestration function here. Okay, so here we will create two orchestrator function, one for function chaining pattern, another one for fan out and fan in. So the next class file, which is activity functions. Here we will define a function where it will communicate with SharePoint. In this demo, we will be getting the list details. So there could be many lists, one or two lists. We are going to get the list information, and to get the list information we need to communicate with SharePoint, and that communication function has to be the activity function, and this function will be called in a chaining pattern and also in a fan out fan in pattern by the orchestrator. Okay, so first let us define the activity function. So here, before writing the function, we already have declared the startup, and we have already binded all the services authentication for the PnPCore. And what we need to do is, we need to declare a PnP context factory here, and inside the activity function constructor we need to get the factory, PnP context factory. Okay, since we are using it as the startup, so this context factory will be available, which is in the activity function, and we will get that context factory. And then based on using that context factory, we will create a communication between SharePoint and then get the list information. So the PnP context factory, we received the PnP context factory, and now we are ready to write the function. It's a very simple function. We will first just give the function name as get list info. And declare the function. So here, so I am using asynchronous task iList detail, which is the properties that we are going to return, since there is no iList detail class which we are going to create it later. So as of now, you just skip it as iList details, and the function name is get list info, and we are going to get the input, which is the list name, for which list we need the info, and a normal log. That's it. So at the start we will just warn it about to call the get list info activity, and inside the using we are just going to get the context. So create async default, PnP context factory dot create async default. So create async will establish a connection to our site. So here by default, this is the default site, and the site URL is coming from local settings, local.settings. I have configured the URL, and from there the site URL is configured here, and also the authentication provider. So using this default, so the connection is established. And we are just using the PnPCore SDK to get the title, to get the list by the title, and also along with the title we are just going to get the template type and the item count. And I have specifically purposely added this delay 10 seconds to show how the orchestration gets into a sleep mode and then it resumes. Okay, so this is the activity function we are going to call for both the application pattern, that is for function chaining as well as fan out and fan in. So now let us create the iList detail, nothing with this three property: title, template and item count. So title as string, template type as string, and the item count as integer. That's it. So now we are done with the activity functions and also with the properties. So now moving on to the orchestration function. Okay. So in orchestration function, we really don't need the PnP context, because all the business logics and whatever the communication we are going to do it with SharePoint, everything is in the activity function. Orchestration function is how we are going to call the activity function and how we are going to process the response. So the first is we will see how we can use the function chaining. So for that, I'll just give the function name as get list details chaining. Next, so here I have used the return type as list collection of iList details, because we are going to return iList list details of multiple lists, not a single list, multiple list. So that is the reason we are just using the list of iList detail, and the orchestrator function name is get list details chaining. And the context, orchestration, durable orchestration context and the log. So first is log context.create replay safe logger. So why we need to do this is because when you try to debug locally, if you put a breakpoint and then when you try to debug this code, it looks like the orchestrator function is executed multiple times, but it is not. And that is the reason, because many times you will be hitting this list details and many times you will be looping through the for each, but on the back end it will be executed only once. In order for the log to restrict on multiple execution and to correctly log, we have to use this create replay safe logger. So it will safely log without replaying, that is without logging multiple times, it will safely log the details, and that is why we have to use this. And here I am just using the list array. I have branch list and categories list, so I need to get the details of these two lists, and I have declared a variable which is collection, list detail collection, and in this list details will be the output. So I am just looping through this list array and I am just calling the activity function function.getListInfo, passing the list title. So for each and every time I am just calling this activity function. So what happens is this chaining, right? First it will send the branch list and it will get the information and it will store it in the list details. Then it will execute again for the categories list. So this is the chaining mode. This is the sequential mode. So here I am just executing sequentially. But what you can do is you can also use the result of the first list, use the result of the first execution, and then you can just send the result of the first execution as an input for the second execution. So in order to explain for a demo purpose, I am just using this type. But in real-time scenario, the result of the first execution will be used in the result as an input parameter for the second execution. Okay, so here we are done with the chaining. Now let us see how the fan out and fan in function looks like. So here I am just giving the name as get list details FOFI, which is fan out fan in, the same output, the same arguments, and the code is very similar until this. And here we have declared a new variable called task, where we are going to store the each activity execution instance. And at last we are going to check whether when all the execution are done, then we are going to send the response. So the same here, using the list array. Here I am just using two list. So this is also using two array of length 2, and I am using for int, for loop, and inside the for loop, for each task I am just calling the activity execution function, and then I am just passing in the each list, and then I am just saving it in a task array. You have to notice that I haven't used this await, because once you use the await, it will behave like a chaining method. It will wait for the first execution to be completed, then it will execute the second list. But here we are not going to do that. At the same time, we are going to execute both branch and categories. Not really at the same time. We are just going to trigger one by one, but parallel. So first I will trigger branch. I will not wait for whether it is executed or not. Then automatically I will trigger for categories. And once for all the lists are triggered, then I wait for all the lists to be executed, all the activities to be executed. Once it is executed, I will process the results, and then I will return the response. So I hope you understand how the chaining and the fan out fan in orchestration works. So now let us go to the HTTP function, and we will write the starter functions. Now we are going to write the trigger part of the Azure durable function. So the HTTP starter functions. So we have to write two starter functions. One is for function chaining, and another one is for fan out and fan in. So I have just called the starter function for chaining as get list details chaining HTTP start, and the output is IAction result. And the trigger is, I have just set it to function authorization level dot function get, because we are not posting any data, we are just reading the data, HTTP request, and the durable orchestration client starter. And using this durable orchestration client, we are going to trigger the orchestration. So declared an instance ID, and also enable the log starting the HTTP starter function. So in the instance ID, we are going to start the new orchestration function, which is get list details chaining, which is the chaining orchestration functions. Okay, so once it is started, we will just get the status using the instance ID. So based on the instance ID only, you can get the status. And if the status, because we need to check the status whether it is done or not. So in order to do that, I have just put a delay of 200 milliseconds, less than a second. So it will loop, because this is a very minimal function. That is, the business logic is very minimum. It's very little. It's not very heavy, it's very light. We are just getting the details, list details. So it shouldn't take more than 1 or 2 seconds. So that's the reason I have just made the delay as less than a second. In case if you are implementing a heavy transactions inside SharePoint, looping through multiple lists or processing something like that, maybe you can increase the delay and then check the status maybe for every second or every 5 seconds. And then once the status is completed, then what you can do is you can just return the output as a OK object result. So here our output looks like a JSON which has a title, template type and the item count. So this is the starter for chaining, and we have the starter for fan out final. So pretty much same. The starter function will be same, except here we are using get list detail chaining orchestration, and here we are using get list detail FOFI orchestration. So that's the only difference. And so based on which starter function you are triggering, so it will trigger the particular orchestration. So in order to check, you need to install Azure Storage emulator, and then when you run this, there will be a simulator which will be running. So in order to test it in the local, so you can have the Azure Storage emulator, and then all the history of this orchestration will be stored in your local. So let me start the emulator and then we will try running this Azure function locally. So this is the Azure Storage Explorer. Here for the local, when you are running the Azure functions in local, it will be stored in your local storage. And in order to use this, you need the Azure Storage Explorer and also Storage Emulator. So those things I have explained in my previous video. And there are two tables. One is Test Hub Name History and Test Hub Name Instance. So when I run the Azure function, so I can just refresh it and show. So as of now, there are no records. But when I run and execute the Azure function, so you can see the values. So let me run the Azure function. So first time we are running it, so it will take some time to build, and then it will provide us a console window with the URL. Okay. So here, if you see here, it is using Azure Function Core Tools, and since we have this function one HTTP start, which is a demo methods, we can ignore this. And the main methods, main URL is the chaining URL and the fan out and fan in URL. So first let us execute this chaining URL, copy the chaining URL, and here this is the URL I have configured, SharePoint Online URL. And if you see the branch, it has 3 items, and categories, it has 10 items. So when I execute this, you should see the logs. So the first is it started the starter function, and then it executed the orchestration. The orchestration again in turn called the get list info activity. The first execution is done. Now it is calling the second get list info activity for the category list, and now the second is also done, and it has returned the values. The first is branch generic list item count as 3. The second is categories generic list item count as 10. Let me go to the branch and let me delete one item. So now when I refresh it, started it, since we put a 10-second delay, it is showing it is delaying the activity, it is delaying the function call. If I remove the 10-second delay, within a fraction of seconds it will return the result. Now you can see the item counters too. And if you see the logs, so as I mentioned, so first it is calling for branch, waiting for the execution to be completed, then it is executing for categories, and once it is executed, at last the final response is returned. This is function chaining. Now let us see how the fan out and fan in works. And before that, I'll go to the Explorer. I'll just refresh it. So here we ran two instances. So if you see the history, so the first instance, okay, this is the first instance. Which is the first instance? This 3.1 is the first instance. The time is 16. So this is the first instance. So the orchestration started, execution started. This is the orchestration execution. And what happens is it triggered the get list info and it went on to the sleeping state. And if you see the time, it is 11, 16, 12. It went to sleep. Then after 10 seconds, after a couple of seconds after the execution is done, it started again because the task is completed. If you see, the branch info is retrieved. So it started and then it completed the task and it scheduled the next task, which is for categories, and it went on to the sleeping mode. And again after a few seconds it resumes and then it completes the task, which is categories. And once this is done, it executes the complete with both the response, with all the response. It has returned, and finally it went again to the sleep mode. And finally the orchestration is ended, completed. So this is how the chaining process. So now let us see how we can the fan out and fan in is executing. Okay, let me clear this instance. Okay, so now let us go here, run the project again. Now let us run the fan out and fan in URL. I have copied it. Go here. Again, paste and execute. So now see here, it has started the HTTP starter function. It has started the orchestrator, and now if you see here, both the activity functions are executed parallelly. It is not waiting for the first execution to be completed. It is executing parallelly. And after execution, it returned the overall response. And this is what the fan out and fan in. So fan out means executing multiple activity functions so that it is out. And once it is done all the execution, we are just consolidating all the response and then we are just sending as a consolidated response, which is in. Out means expanding the functions, and then in means which we are reducing the calls and then making as a consolidated response. And if you see the Azure Storage Explorer, so the orchestration started, execution started, it has scheduled both the tasks, and now if you see here, it is completed because it has scheduled the task and then it went on to the sleeping mode. And once the task is completed, right, here you cannot say we had a delay of 10 seconds and why it didn't wait for 20 seconds, because if you see here 4 and then again it resumed at 17, because the first execution will start at 10 seconds and in that same time we started the second execution also. So it is a combination of the delays, but in the same time. At the same time, both the functions are delayed. So it can't be 20 seconds, it will be around 10 to 12 seconds. Okay, so when both the executions are completed, so if you see here, this is the first and second and the overall response here. And once the response is returned, then the orchestration is completed. So here executing parallel functions, right? For example, if you are executing 3 parallel functions, you may not know which function will be executed first. So it is executed in parallel. So any function, maybe function 3 can complete first, function 1 can complete at the end. So make sure you use fan out and fan in if you want to use the same method for different with the different parameters. For example, if you want to check the item count or check the list information, like how we have used it here, you can use the fan out and fan in. Or if you want to get the report of multiple list which has the same columns and the same functionality, you can parallelly execute it using the fan out and fan in. So this is what the fan out and fan in function. I hope you understood how the durable function works. And the same I have deployed in Azure Functions. Here if you have seen, so the first is the HTTP, chaining HTTP, and then FI HTTP, and 2 orchestration and 1 activity function. And you are going to get the same output. So let me start this function. So now I have started the function, Azure Function, the durable function. So as I mentioned, so now we need to execute the chaining start. So I have already copied the URL. So in order to see whether it is correctly executing or not, let us add an item, item name. Okay. So now I have added an item. So now for the branch, it should return 3 items. So if you see here, I am just using the SP durable Azure function Azure websites.net, and see the function is executed and the item is returned as, item count as returned as 3, and for categories it is 10. So now I will delete this item, and now I will execute the fan out and fan in. And if you see, this is the chaining start, and now here I am just executing the fan out and fan in start with the function code. So here, so the item count is returned as 2. So now I am executing all these functions from Azure, not from the local, from Azure. So in order to execute the Azure functions from Azure portal, you have to declare an app, you have to register an app, and you have to make some changes for the authentication and other settings you have to migrate. So all those information are explained detail in my previous video. Please have a look at this. And I really appreciate your time in watching this video. I hope you have learned something on Azure Function and also on the PnPCore SDK. Please feel free to comment or like this video. And if you want me to post any video or any other in Power Automate, SharePoint Framework, in Azure Functions, please put it as a comment. I'm always here to help you guys. Thanks. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.